Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to this presentation. My name is Jaroslav Mysiak, and I will talk on behalf of a group of European research institutes working on partnerships for enhancement of resilience, especially in the case of low probability, high impact type of events. It's hardly surprising that the economic losses caused by natural disaster in Europe are increasing. They are increasing worldwide for different reasons. And what is interesting in this message is that around 70% of the total damage of, summing up all the events over the period 1980 up to 2013, 70% of the total damage was caused by small number of disasters. Low probabilities, high impact. And this is exactly this type of events with which the European governments find it difficult to cope with. This is the idea behind partnership. It means that all sectors of society have to team up in order to devise strategies and solutions to exactly this type of events. The concluding remarks or the new international agreement for the period post-2015 referred to partnership in many spaces, many places. It will become one of the cornerstones of both the international strategy and the national or local ones. In Europe, exactly for this reason, the project Enhance has been funded. It's an FP7 project, that is implemented by a number of European institutions, and it's looking especially to devise different ways to enhance resilience of society to low probability, high impact type of natural hazard. And this will be done by developing new risk scenarios and producing new knowledge, and as well as contributing to development of multi-sectoral partnerships. And we are looking at different types of partnerships. The first, and probably the most important, is a sort of public-private partnership for affordable and viable insurance schemes in Europe. The second type of partnerships are users' assemblies that decide together about how to manage the remaining resource, typically water. Another type of partnership is cross-border, territorial, transboundary partnership, which are materialized in Europe, especially through regional, macro-regional strategies. And there are yet another type of partnerships which looks into cooperation between public agencies and authorities in a way that saves money or improves the coordination or the service provision in Europe. So we cover all those four types of different partnership. And we look at different case studies. Those case studies are spread all around Europe. We have 7 regional strategies that are implemented in Spain, in Juca River Basin in Italy, in the Po River Basin in Austria, in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, on the border between Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark, which is the Wadden Sea region, and City of London. Those are 7 regional strategies or case studies. And then we have 3 pan-European cases that look into health and health service provision, and pan-European flood risk assessment, and aviation safety. So we're looking into a number of different hazards in a number of different places for which different partnerships have been devised. Now, the first step of the way how we are advising the partnership is to try to improve the risk assessment. I mentioned before, we are looking at the low probability, high impact events. To the extent possible, we are building upon observed or projected environmental and societal changes by combining quantitative and qualitative data and data analysis techniques. And those risk assessments are specified in collaboration with the stakeholders or driven by the partnership for which they are devised. Now, I have said we have 10 specific and detailed studies. I have picked up only some examples just to give you an insight, but there is a whole research done for every case study, full risk assessment, full assessment of the multi-stakeholder partnership that has yet to be completed. So I start with the first one. There is an interesting study that was done on the risk assessment for the whole Europe, flood risk assessment, taking into account the available climate projections, looking into the projected GDP, the wealth increases, looking into the way how societal vulnerability will increase in the coming years. What is new in this project, it takes into account the spatial dependencies among the hazard events. And it has been shown and demonstrated by the evidence, by the results, that the annual expected damage, if you take into account those spatial dependencies, is higher in Europe than if you make the assessment individually for river basins or individual member states. So this is a message to be taken home. Look for the spatial dependencies of the hazard events. Another case we are looking into, or I pick up for this presentation, is the London flood risk assessment. UK is developing a new type of public-private partnership for insurance provision, especially for the households that are exposed to high risk. And these or any other insurance scheme should be informed about how the climate change is going to change, how the flood risk is going to change when you take into account the human-induced climate change. So this study has shown and provided evidence that the climate change will increase the property losses by 50 to 80% by 2030 or 2050, respectively. So it's another take-home message. Whenever you are designing the insurance schemes or risk-sharing transfer schemes, then you should really look into how the risk is changing due to the climate change and other environmental or societal changes. I have another example from Italy. The example is looking at the flood protection infrastructure and how the flood risk might increase if this infrastructure is disturbed or disrupted. This happened in Italy as a consequence of 2012 earthquake, and we have calculated both the increased damage due to high exposure to the flood, but we have also highlighted that by controlled flooding strategies, you might reduce the expected damage. So this is yet another message to take home, even if you have your critical infrastructure disrupted or seriously damaged. The information about how the risk is distributed over the space might help you to design disaster risk strategies even for the transition period until after the infrastructure is fully restored. I have one more example. This is the case of risk assessment of the Rotterdam port. Rotterdam port is the largest, by far largest seaport in Europe and the most important. It's outside of the embankment area of the Rotterdam. The colleagues conducted a risk assessment that has documented the direct physical damage as well as the indirect economic damage due to the business interruption. What is interesting in this study is that the latter, the indirect damage, might even exceed the direct physical damage. But usually in the risk assessment or risk management plans, the indirect economic losses are not accounted for. So the take-home message in this case is to, when conducting your risk assessment, look at the wider induced effects of the hazard events you are assessing. A part of conducting the risk assessment in a specific way in each case study, where we try to collect the whole wealth of information available, where we try to factor in the expected environmental and societal changes. We are using those strategies also to simulate how the partnership would be able to cope with similar events. This is interesting as a stress test for existing partnership or as a food for thought for devising of new partnerships. We strongly agree that the partnership, if it has to become, or if it's becoming a policy instrument or a component of multi-level governance in Europe and elsewhere, has to be accountable. That means has to be designed according to specific guiding principles, have to comply with the good governance principles that are applied throughout Europe and elsewhere. And so in the next stage, we are looking at the partnership and subjecting each one to a series of normative questions and practical questions. Will the partnership be able to cope with analyzed hazard? And does the partnership really comply with good practice of environmental governance? I'm ready to answer any question, and I would like to invite you to look at our website. There are plenty of interesting stuff and detailed reports about each of the case studies. I picked only some teasers to raise your interest, but there is a whole wealth of useful stuff and information.